this idea in general. I'd like to find out more about that. Those were some of my ideas regarding multicultural education a couple months ago. Now that the course is over, I've learned a lot more about what it means to be a social justice teacher. Since midterm, I've grown to see that multicultural education isn't just a part of the classroom, and that it has to be integrated throughout the class. The activity with Pat really showed me how much not being accepted can do to a student. It can be like they have lost their limbs. So I know now that social justice has to be throughout my instruction and not just parts of it. Certain aspects of the chapters that we read really influenced this decision. Learning about race science taught me that there are more genetic differences among people of the same race than there are among people of different races. This helped me see that race isn't real, but racism is, and that race was actually created by people. This leads me to the second term that had a big impact on me, which is socio-political construct. I know now that race is a socio-political construct, meaning that society created it to give privilege to one group. A final aspect of the race unit that had a big impact on me was Jane Elliott's brown-eyed, blue-eyed student experiment. She decided to teach her students that racism does not make sense by treating the brown-eyed students like they were better than the blue-eyed, and then vice versa. The students really felt how discrimination feels and learned an important lesson about race as a basis for discrimination. To me, this experiment really illustrated what it feels like to be the person who's discriminated against for something they can't even control, and I really learned that race is a socio-political construct. When we started learning about how religion impacts multicultural education, I learned how integral the First Amendment is to understanding why there are so many debates about religion in schools. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, meaning that schools that accept government funding cannot outright respect a religion or prohibit it. Numerous court cases have occurred because of the First Amendment, but the general consensus now is that school officials cannot lead a prayer, neither can coaches or teachers, but students are of course allowed to have the freedom to pray on their own. They just cannot be led by a school official. In some schools, they just disregard this rule because the school is predominantly Christian, but they are in danger of getting in trouble from the courts. A final term I learned from this unit is religious pluralism. This term is really important here in the U.S. because the United States is pluralistic religiously. This means that we are not just all Christian. We have all kinds of different religions and people who aren't even religious, making us a diverse religious community. This diversity should be celebrated. The next set of terms come from two chapters regarding gender. The first is the boy crisis. The boy crisis is a term that has come about to describe the disparity between boys and girls in school. The idea is that girls have been underrepresented for so long that now too much attention is paid to them and boys are left out. For example, more boys repeat kindergarten than girls, more boys are suspended, and more boys are diagnosed with learning disabilities. In addition, females are more likely to complete and enroll in college. However, boys are not completely at a disadvantage, as they are more likely than girls to go into STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math. Part of this is because boys grow up playing with Legos and building blocks, while girls take the more nurturing role of cooking or playing with dolls in their imaginative play. More movements are going on to get girls more involved in STEM, and soon these numbers may change. The fact that girls play with dolls while boys play with Legos is an example of socialization, which means that their gender roles are imposed upon them by society. Another term that vividly illustrated to me the differences between genders in society is the glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is an unofficially acknowledged barrier to advancement in a profession, especially affecting women. It's basically the idea that women can't get as far as men in a certain profession. It's hard for me to combat the glass ceiling in my classroom because it most often occurs in workplaces, but I'll talk about male and female doctors, lawyers, and business people, for example, in my classroom so that I don't perpetuate a glass ceiling stereotype. A part of combating the glass ceiling is to promote a non-sexist education. The classic example of hidden messages in the curriculum would be asking for boys when you need something heavy moved, or asking for girls when you need someone with nice handwriting. To provide a non-sexist education, teachers need to be aware of these biases and avoid sending a hidden message. Homophobia is a fear, dislike, or prejudice against homosexual people. This is important for teachers to be familiar with because if they are homophobic themselves, they could accidentally convey this information to gay students. Or teachers may have homophobic students in their classroom, in which case teachers need to make sure both the homophobic student and the homosexual student feel comfortable. Heterosexism is the belief that opposite-sex relationships are the only right relationships. Teachers who may have this bias have to make sure they still treat their LGBT students with respect. They also have to know how to deal with conflicts between gay students and heterosexist students. The story of Jazz got past all of the definitions for me and really showed me the feelings of transgender students. Jazz, a transgender child, helped me to understand the struggles of transgender students a little more and helped me to feel empathy for her. One of the most important parts of the socioeconomic status unit was learning about non-achieving students. Often, for non-achieving students, the school culture and the home culture are incongruent. This can make it hard for the students to learn, as often the teacher's values and the family's values are different. Also, the student does not learn in the same way as the teacher teaches. They have different learning styles. Finally, teacher expectations and the self-fulfilling prophecy can be a big part of why students do not achieve. If a student comes in who is clearly poor, the teacher may assume that they cannot learn because they know the statistics of students who are poor. They have trouble learning. This can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy as the teacher assumes this child cannot learn and so the child cannot. Parental involvement has been proven to be a huge factor in student academic success. The National Committee for Students in Education says that family is the primary provider of the educational environment. However, this can be very difficult for students whose parents work 2 jobs or for students who only have one parent. This is often the case for students of low socioeconomic status. For these students whose parents cannot be as involved as they hope, it's important for the teacher to care for that student and make the student feel like they matter. Also, bringing the home culture into the classroom as much as possible can make the student feel supported. As I mentioned before, the Coming Out of Pat activity was one of the most valuable of this semester because I learned what it actually felt like to be a person in that situation. We've talked about what we need to do for students that don't feel like they belong or who feel like they aren't supported in the classroom, but you never really know how they feel. This activity was really personal and helped me understand why I need to help these students. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned some parts of myself that lead to biases that I may have in the classroom. One that I didn't really mention is my bias towards transgender students. I feel very ignorant when talking about this subject because I don't know as much about it as I should, and this bias could lead to me treating these students unfairly or with confusion, and that can make them feel like they don't matter as much. To help combat this bias, I must find out as much about this issue as possible and just talk to the students and get their experiences to know more about themselves. That's why the transgender unit is one thing I still have questions about. I also have questions about all the difficult scenarios we've come up in class when we haven't been able to come up with an answer. These will occur throughout my teaching career. I think the only way to answer them is by discussing with the students and other faculty and using online resources to figure out a solution. There may not be one end-all solution, but the most important part is making sure that students feel respected and comfortable. Multicultural education will be important in my future practice because I believe it's a way to address disparities in education. As a multicultural educator, I will have 2 major goals: being aware of my own biases and creating a classroom where students matter. These are the 2 most important aspects of multicultural education, in my opinion. There will always be difficult situations, but by staying true to these beliefs and collaborating with others, I can have a successful multicultural classroom.